Hello, good morning. Excellent. People are joining. People are joining. Hello, welcome, welcome. We will be starting at 9 o'clock CET. That's 10 o'clock if you are in the time zone to the right. Yeah, let's just wait for people to join and then we'll kick off sharply. All right, dear attendees, thanks for being here. 2 more minutes. We'll just wait for people to steadily come along and then we'll start. Okay, 1 more minute until kickoff, and then we'll probably wait 1 or 2 more minutes just for people to come over. Hello, welcome. Thanks to all of you who are here at 9 o'clock sharp. But wait, let's just wait 1 or 2 more minutes if we have other people kind of joining a bit late, and then we can kick off. Okay, welcome, welcome. We slowly have people joining in. I'd say, okay, let's wait until past 5, if that's okay with everybody. All right, I see a very sharp influx of people. I do hope this isn't because of any GoToWebinar technical issues, though those do arrive and do arise. If you just are slightly patient with us, just so we can have all those stalled starters come, and then we just kick off. Okay, we have about nearly 100 people. Nice round number. So I suggest we start in the interest of your time as well. Welcome to our session on biodiversity and business decarbonization. And we'll be happy to present this very interesting topic to you today, and happy to be part of the We Value Nature 10-Day Business Challenge as well. The We Value Nature 10-Day Business Challenge, as you know, is organized an ongoing event until 24th of March with all sorts of interesting sessions, and we do encourage you to take part. Before we kind of kick off, just some technical things. If you want to post a question at any time, we have a person monitoring those. Just expand the GoToWebinar window to the right and then enter a question in the chat. You can also raise your hand as well if you want to grab our attention. You're probably familiar with this already, but just in case. Yeah, get involved. We Value Nature 10-Day Challenge is ongoing. If you follow this link, you can learn all about it. And as you know, Value Nature is a broad project of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, IUCN, OPLA, supported by the Capitals Coalition, and last but not least, the European Union. And now, welcome to our session. Let's begin. We will discuss why business should care about climate and biodiversity issues. Maybe you already know. Hopefully, you'll learn something new. We'll definitely be talking about what's coming in terms of new reporting initiatives. And we will also talk about how companies can already start preparing right now. Your speakers for today would be myself. I'm Ivan Postovjiev. I'm senior consultant at Denkstadt, and I lead our natural and social capital services, which includes impact assessments, water management, biodiversity management, and as well as a lot of other cross-cutting things, both for business and for public institutions, including the European Commission. And on the right here, I have my colleague Konstantin, who is going to introduce himself.
Yeah, hello and good morning also from my side. Konstantin Zaletta, I'm a senior consultant with Denkstadt, based in Vienna, Austria. I'm our international service leader for decarbonization. So my work is mainly focused on everything around climate strategies, how we can support companies on the journey towards becoming a climate fit company, also in terms of risk and opportunities management. And I'm happy to cover this part in today's webinar.
Excellent.
So Denkstadt in one picture, just shortly to introduce you where we're coming from. Many of you may know Denkstadt already. So we are based in different countries in Central Eastern Europe. We have our headquarters in Vienna, but also have offices in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and a partnership with Sustainable in Germany, based in Munich. We are a successful sustainability advisory since more than 25 years now. We have almost 150 dedicated sustainability experts consulting and advising public or mainly private organizations, companies on sustainability issues. Our industry sectors are nearly everything, I would say, so there's nothing excluded there. And our topics, we came along from EHS management, rather management system focused, going over to data management, sustainability management in a broader sense, sustainability data management as well, and always try to cover, of course, the emerging issues. So decarbonization, it's not really emerging. It was there for 20 years, but the interest is really just growing in the last years. So that's what we dedicated a lot of resources there and have it as one of our focus areas in terms of team structures, in terms of dedicated experts, but also in terms of course, the areas we like to cover. So handing back to, So kind of to sum it up, who are we? We are business advisors in environmental and sustainability affairs. And we really are interested in kind of supporting our clients from strategy through to implementation. So not only kind of leave you with the concept, leave you with the ideas, with the strategies, but really kind of with the hands-on work as well. We have experience in that, and we really enjoy seeing how our ideas and how our advisory work gets implemented and leading to really measures which have a positive impact on sustainability.
Cool, thank you, Konstantin. Right, before we start, let's kind of wake you up a bit, okay? Let's do some mentees. There is a code, and you will now see it on your screen when I switch over to my mentees, and we can start with our first block for today. Okay, bear with us with the technology for 1 second. All right, and now you should be able to see a slide with a join link, and the link is 5449636, which I'll also post in the chat. And you can just go there and you can tell us where you come from, which would be great. All right, votes coming in. A lot of fellow consultants, some business as well. All right, let's see. About 30 people voted already out of 100 participating. Okay, business growing. Okay. Fellow consultants, I didn't know you're so interested in what we do. We'd be happy to exchange some experience. All right, 42 people. Let's wait a bit more. Let's get that number up to 100. 45, 46, 50, 52, 53. Nice to see colleagues from the NGO sector join in as well. For us, always interesting to exchange experience, always interested in collaborating. As well, I know Konstantin does a lot of great work in Austria with WWF on their Climate Savers program, as well with businesses there, and throughout Europe as well. We collaborate with quite a range of NGOs on different topics. All right, I have 65 votes. I'll wait 30 more seconds, and then I will close this one, and we can move to the next. Well, I think most of us who want to vote have already voted. So, welcome. nice mix. Business, more than half. Some fellow consultants, as I said, always interested to change experience, and as well some researchers and some NGO participants, hugely instrumental in for the sort of topics we'll be talking about, both for climate historically and for biodiversity more and more today, for pushing that on the corporate agenda. Okay, let's see where you are in terms of natural capital. We are here as part of the We Value Nature 10-day challenge, as you know. We'd be really interested to know where are you in terms of natural capital assessments? Are you just kind of starting? You've never done an assessment before. You're kind of interested in learning. Okay. Or maybe you've already done an assessment, but you want to see how you can improve. Or maybe you know all about it and you've already done natural capital assessments and you are a front runner. Okay, already 30-something people in the first few seconds. I'm new to the subject. I am aware. I have done some work. Interesting, very few of you have actually carried out the natural capital assessment. I wouldn't say that's surprising. I mean, this sort of topic is quite cutting edge. At the same time, what we'll show today is that actually a lot of this natural capital thinking directly feeds into the sort of stuff we'll be expecting companies will have to report on for biodiversity as well. And there's some links to climate there, especially in terms of how we manage climate issues from the land sector, from the agricultural sector, how we deal with emission removals and all this sort of new up and coming stuff that I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking about in your own for climate strategies, forestry strategies, etc. All right. 60 people, same as last time. So let's put in a close here. Most of you are kind of just learning. Some of you already kind of know some of the concepts. And what we want to show you is really how those concepts, even if you haven't done a natural capital assessment before, can help you and guide you through these new upcoming issues that companies will probably need to report on. Okay, last but not least. Interested to know, in your opinion, what are the key sustainability trends for 2021? Just to gauge the interest, just to gauge your understanding. Obviously, there's so much happening in the sustainability space right now. I mean, with the European Green Deal, with all these topics are just everywhere right now. I mean, definitely our business is really doing well. I'll tell you that. I mean, we are having so many requests. But there is occasionally this divide of what policymakers are thinking about, what NGOs are pushing for. They really tend to push for the new things, the things that are up and coming, while business occasionally takes some time to catch up. So really interested in actually seeing this right now. Climate, circular economy, things that I'm sure most of you are really working very heavily on. Supply chain is gaining so much more importance. Demand for sustainable products, biodiversity, yes, but we still don't see it as much. Air quality, maybe some of you think this. It's a very local issue. Where I come from in Eastern Europe, definitely on the agenda, but definitely not as pervasive and as global and as impactful as climate issues, waste issues. Yeah, 50-something people voted already. I feel that's a good number. Nearly what we had before. Let's just wait 2 more seconds because I see a few more people are voting in. Okay, thanks. Climate and circular economy almost equal. I'd say yes, there is a good reason why you think these are the top issues of 2020-21. But as we go along, I think, or I hope we'll be able to convince you that actually biodiversity and supply chain are really picking up on the agenda. And then issues related to that, to do with water, to do with sustainable products, will inevitably gain momentum in the next few years. Enough about mentees. Can I kindly ask you then to go back to the presentation? And here we are again. All right, just giving a second for everybody to come back in. And we will kick off with the first topic, which is climate, and Konstantin will tell you all about that.
Yeah, I'm eager on that. So I hoped that climate would come up as the leader, actually. So I'm also confident it's now equal on part one with circular economy. But let us start with climate. We discussed should we start with biodiversity as one of the two topics today, or with climate? We decided with climate because we think it's an established issue. I think everybody in the room is aware climate change, climate crisis is happening at the moment. Most companies, most organizations are engaged in that. And we kind of want to show you our perspective, our experience. How should companies and organizations care about this? How should they engage with that? What are the key elements of a climate strategy? And what are international frontrunners doing about this? So that's what you can expect in the next slides, in the next 15 to 20 minutes. Just to give you a kind of an overview about engagement and interactiveness in the webinar today. Of course, you can use the chat function for any questions. We dedicated some time also after each of the topic-wise blocks. But we will have an extensive Q&A session at the end. So if there are any not so urgent issues, we will really find time for this at the end to discuss this with you. Starting with this slide to really start in a broader sense, trends in corporate sustainability. So we think if a company or if any organization, because we don't have only businesses in the call today, so if any organization wants to engage in sustainability, in our experience, you look out for different perspectives. You look at competitors, you look at clients, obviously, you look at client requirements, what the market is demanding from you. Of course, supply chain is gaining more and more importance in terms of also that the responsibility of organizations is kind of extended towards the supply chain and the value chain. Back maybe 20, 15 years ago, corporate sustainability was more really focused about the direct impacts of a company, of an organization. Now the value chain is kind of included into this definition of corporate responsibility. So that's why organizations in any sector really should also care about any impacts, positive and negative, that also happen in their supply chain or in the broader value chain. And then, of course, sustainable alternatives, they can also be a signal that the market is moving more towards sustainability in general, and that maybe your specific company with your products and services, if you decide to want to be upfront, you need to move in the same direction. So coming from these different perspectives and spheres, we think there are major sustainability trends which are more or less applicable to any sector. And also in terms of prioritization, which you see on the slide, starting with decarbonization, we think is really one of the main issues out there, not only in terms of the interest that businesses or organizations in general have in this issue, but also in the urgency which is demanded from us as global society, but also from us as business leaders in this area. So decarbonization is kind of a must-have for any sector, for any company out there. You saw in the Mentimeter slides that people in the room also get the kind of the same feeling, a circular economy. In your vote, it was not really a kind of a follower, it was at the same level already. So clearly it depends on where you're coming from. I think in certain areas, circular economy kind of was there in the last years, decades already. For others, it's more of a newer issue, which they struggle with how they should engage with that. And coming to sustainable finance, I get the feeling that's really pushed also from the regulation side, from the EU side, with EU sustainable finance platforms, EU action plan on financing sustainable growth as the main touching points. Finance sector is really driven by these regulatory developments. They will not be implemented in the future. They're really happening at the moment. 2021 is the year for sustainable finance in the European Union in terms of also regulatory changes. And of course, this will also trickle down to the non-financial sectors, because investors, banks, insurance companies, they need to engage with their investees. They need to engage with the companies which ask for a loan, which ask for an insurance, which ask for an investment. And ESG issues will become more and more important, only from the regulatory side, but also, of course, there are also other aspects to sustainable finance. And lastly, there's biodiversity. in our understanding, also looking at the prioritization on this slide here, we think it's kind of a runner-up to the other issues. It's not so present in the discussions. It's not so present in the regulation. It's not so present in terms of standards, methodologies out there where business can kind of use them as a framework. But still, if you look at certain policy developments, but especially scientific developments and NGOs kind of pushing this topic onto the agendas, we think it's really the next big thing in corporate sustainability. There are major developments in terms of tools and methodologies and frameworks that companies can use to engage for biodiversity, for nature. Just two mentioned there: Science-Based Targets Network for Nature, Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. Ivan will talk you through that in more detail than in his part of this webinar later on. But kind of to sum this slide up for you, we think that certain areas which involves corporate sustainability, they are really mature. They are also kind of must-to-haves for any company, for any organization. That's mainly decarbonization for, I would say, really all the sectors out there, for all the industries. Circular economy, really important for certain sectors, but coming more and more into the broader economic area. Sustainable finance will trickle down from the financial industry to the non-financial sectors as well. And biodiversity kind of developing at the moment, and we think even if it's not on the agenda as heavily as the other issues at the moment in 2021, it will be there in the next years. So now is the time to prepare for that. Now really focusing on climate. As we say, we think it's an established issue. Still, I wanted to have some kind of basic introduction for you into the area of climate change, into the area of climate crisis, as it's also put there by certain stakeholders. Many of you might know these slides out there, these graphs out there. It's from Climate Action Tracker, a British NGO, which really is good in kind of summing up climate science information into graphs which are easily digested. So what you see in this slide on the left-hand side, the black line, historical greenhouse gas emissions per year from 1990 up to 2020. So trend is moving upwards clearly. So maybe in 2020 we will see a downward trend because of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. But still, the trend over these years, over these decades, it's showing in an upward direction. And all the other lines, which you see on the right-hand side of this graph, they are going down. And the question is, how steep will we, as global society, manage to bring emissions down, and which scenarios will we really reach in our climate action that we have as a global society? We know that from current policies, so what is out there, which is implemented already as legislation, we will head towards a global warming of almost more or less 3 degrees Celsius until end of the century. And we know also clearly from climate science, especially if you look at the IPCC 1.5 degree report, which came out 2018, that a warming of 1.5 degrees up to maximum of 2 degrees, that's also including dangerous impacts of climate change. But if we head for a warming of 3 degrees in the future, that's really catastrophic. So we don't want to go there. We don't want this future for us, for our children, for our grandchildren. That's why now is the time to act on this. Now is the time to engage on this. And we really need to bend this curve towards ideally the 1.5 degree scenario, which we see on the green dotted line. The gap on this is closing really fast. So if you follow the laser dot on the right side, you see these temperature scales. We are at the moment at 1.1 degrees warming already. So if we speak about limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, the gap is really just really small. Even if we stop emitting any greenhouse gas now in 2021, there will be some time-lagged effects of the greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere, which leads us definitely to at least a warming of 1.3 degrees. So the gap which is there, which we can really just kind of the carbon budget which is out there for our emissions in the next decades and centuries, it's almost, in terms of temperature, it's 0.2 degrees. So it's really not more budget that we have, which means that we cannot really continue business as usual. Every actor out there that involves also the business world, not only in terms of regulation, but also in terms of voluntary ambition and voluntary action, is asked for to help to close this gap. Coming to the business sphere, there are different elements of climate management that companies can kind of pick up and use in terms of implementing a climate strategy and supporting this trend for decarbonization. In our understanding, it makes sense to start from the baseline building, so from the foundation. And if you talk about implementing climate strategy, if you want to bring down your emissions, if you want to also limit and mitigate any risks for your business from climate change and benefit from the opportunities that climate action can have for you, then you need to know where you're coming from. And for needing to know where you're coming from, for being informed about the status quo, Greenhouse Gas Protocol is one of the most widely used instruments out there because it informs companies in how to build up a climate inventory, how to build up a greenhouse gas inventory, and informs you about the starting points in your climate journey. That leads you then to climate strategy, which usually starts with assessment of scenarios, climate scenarios, and then evaluate any risks and chances that companies can have from climate change. So don't only focus on the risk side, there may be also chances for your organization from climate change, or from climate action, from climate policies. And the question is, are you aware of them? Are you ready to mitigate your risks, to reap your benefits from this, and build up your strategy from that? And then what we will try to focus on in our session today, climate strategy, including robust and quantitative, ambitious climate targets. How can company derive that? What is the main concept for that? And what is asked for you at the moment and in the future? So where is this discussion heading towards? And to kind of anticipate that, the big discussion at the moment is net zero emissions, climate neutrality, and the question we would like to discuss with you today, find answers with you today, is how can companies contribute to that? What's the way forward for companies in terms of decarbonization and net zero? And lastly, also one of these drivers out there is the disclosure. So any forms of corporate, non-financial, or sustainability or climate reporting, any way that you want to call it. But disclosure is something that companies can use for informing the stakeholders, mainly their financial stakeholders, about climate risks, climate opportunities, climate strategy. So kind of to sum it up, what the financial stakeholders are mainly and mostly interested in from companies to hear about is how fit and how ready are you as an organization with this mega trend? Are you aware of it? Have you prepared for it? Or try to are you already trying to be kind of ahead of the curve in terms of being a leader, being a front runner, and being more than aware, but really heavily engaged in climate action? So before we go into the area of climate strategy, let me start from the beginning. For me, it's really important to stress that if we want to go deeper into this discussion, you really need to establish a baseline. You need to know where you're coming from. I think many of you in the room today are aware of this. Just for the others, maybe to reiterate this importance, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is the international standard for greenhouse gas accounting, not actually only for companies, but also there's this corporate accounting standard, which is focused on the business world. This accounting standard is really established. It's really kind of has proven its usability. Greenhouse Gas Protocol is there for more than 20 years now, and emerged as the most comprehensive global standard for the issue of greenhouse gas inventories for companies. There are also other forms out there, the ISO standards, which many of you might be aware of, but it kind of builds up, everything is aligned with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And also in terms of other standards and methodologies, if it's TCFD when it comes to climate risk management, if it's science-based targets coming to climate strategies, everything is aligned and kind of follows the Greenhouse Gas Protocol when it comes to baseline building. And the main picture, which I always like to show coming from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, is this here, where it's easier maybe for you to grasp which forms of greenhouse gas emissions can be relevant for an organization, for business. on how can I structure that. So really just shortly going in there, because I think many people in the room today are aware of that and are already maybe having a GHG inventory in line with Greenhouse Gas Protocol. But the main message I wanted to convey with you today is there are 3 scopes. Scope 1, direct emissions, so anything coming up of your rooftops, of your company facilities, of your vehicles, which is owned by your organization. That's what we call Scope 1 emissions, what the Greenhouse Gas Protocol calls Scope 1 emissions. So really the direct emissions of your organization. Then there's Scope 2 emissions. Any indirect emissions are related to purchased forms of energy. So not fuels, because they would be burned in your facilities, in your vehicles, that's Scope 1. But any other forms of energy, mainly electricity, steam, and district heating or district cooling, this is covered by Scope 2. And Scope 1 and 2, that's usually what is called the operational emissions of a company. So emissions from your operations, either direct or indirect, which is linked directly to your facilities, to your operations, to your processes. And then there's this broader area, this broader scope of Scope 3 emissions. Those are any forms of indirect emissions from your value chain. So either upstream from your supply chain, anything you buy, which brings a kind of carbon backpack, a carbon footprint with it. That can be materials, that can be goods, that can be transportation that you use to transport goods from A to B, upstream, and then also downstream. So towards your customers, how do you distribute your goods, your services towards the customer? How are your goods and services used and processed by customers or by end consumers? And also then for financial players out there in the room, also the thing of the CO2 or the carbon emissions embedded in your portfolios, embedded in your investments. That would also be something included in Scope 3 emissions. And what we want to stress today is the significance of these value chain emissions. So a recent publication by CDP, by the major climate and environmental reporting disclosure framework out there, shows us that supply chain emissions are more than 10%, 10 times higher than the operational, so the Scope 1 and 2 emissions across all the different industries out there. So kind of the average company has factor 10 higher Scope 3 emissions than operational emissions. And that shows the significance, the importance of also including these value chain emissions in your inventory, but also in your discussions about bringing down emissions in your climate strategies. You shouldn't only look for operational emissions, really these value chain emissions, they should be at the center of any climate strategy. This is what stakeholders expect from companies nowadays. That was not there in the last years maybe, but in 2020 and 2021, this importance grew, and this is what's demanded from companies. Back down on this slide, in really small font, you will see that these factors are really different in different industries. So retail sector, to bring up one of the front runners up there you have a factor of almost 30, because of course a retailer is buying mainly agricultural goods or other goods and selling it to the market. So the operational emissions are rather small compared to the emissions embedded in the products. And the same is true for other sectors as well. So don't forget Scope 3 emissions, don't forget value chain emissions. Those are harder to tackle, harder to kind of to grasp and to reduce. And Ivan will also show us then the kind of the linkages and the overlaps in terms of biodiversity, because also there the value chain plays a central part, and there are certain overlaps where you may be able with a smart strategy to tackle both of the issues. Coming to climate strategy, many companies are at the moment asking us or other advisors, how should we implement this? So what is a robust framework to drive a solid climate strategy for our organization, which also kind of is robust against any external stakeholder feedback, any external criticism, and is a framework which is kind of solid enough to be there also in the next years, so that we don't have to switch to any other form of methodology because there's a new trend coming up. And in our understanding, this asks for a framework, this methodology, which is solid, which is science-based, which is kind of robust against any external criticism or feedback, is the Science Based Targets initiative. So that's a platform, an initiative founded by 4 of the main global environmental NGOs: CDP, UN Global Compact, WWF, World Resources Institute. And those NGOs, they came up with the objective that businesses should have a method which is hands-on, which is easy to understand, but which is really robust in terms of science-based reduction targets for companies which are science-based, which are in line with decarbonization needed under the Paris Agreement. That was the kind of initial objective of this platform. And that's why if you now talk about science-based targets, you find in their criteria, so there are a lot of really helpful documents, guidances, tools on their website, which we help companies in implementing in their context. What in essence, what they are doing, what they are helping you to do is that you derive for your company, for your context, greenhouse gas reduction target, which is long-term and which is in line with the decarbonization needed to limit global warming to a certain degree. So it can be either well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degree. It covers all the 3 scopes. So also scope 3 emissions are covered by this framework. And you see from the numbers, they may not be that astonishing, but still more than 600 companies have approved science targets. So you can then submit your target framework, and this initiative will kind of go through it, check it, and if it's solid enough, if it's in line with their criteria, it can be approved. You get stamped, so to speak. You will be listed on the website. You will get kind of a reputational benefits from that. You get rating benefit from that. So a lot of benefits for companies also in submitting their targets and getting them approved by this initiative. And there are more and more companies also committing to this and planning to implement the science-based targets in the future. So in our understanding, in our experience, if companies want to implement quantitative, long-term and ambitious climate targets, then this is the initiative, this is the platform to look for. But as mentioned, science-based targets, so the reduction of greenhouse gases in the mid to longer term, that's kind of more and more established in company discussions, and also what we have the feeling also in the boardrooms from a C-level, there is a kind of a basic awareness about climate issues, science-based targets. And in the climate area, what we think is the next big thing, kind of the new guiding star, net zero. So we had a lot of discussion with company representatives in 2020 regarding how can we become net zero. Our CEO wants us to become net zero because their competitors are doing it. They're using this as a marketing claim. Our customers are kind of uncertain what they should think about it, but still we should engage in that. Then the question is how to do that, because at the moment there is no real framework for that. So there's no really international accepted definition what net zero means for a company. But you will find it kind of everywhere. You find it in business discussions. You find it from different consultancies with different frameworks out there. You find it also in the policy arena. This is some example here showing you the climate target of the European Union. So as you might be aware, the EU intends or kind of made it a public commitment to become net zero until 2050. There's more or less a clear picture of the European Union, how they want to achieve this. So which sector has to contribute to what? What is the milestone? So the 2030 target was approved also by the EU Council, by the heads of state end of last year. So we know kind of the path we need to follow down to reach this ambition, to reach this target of becoming net zero until 2050. We also know that there will be some emissions which we as the European Union, as also different sectors out there, we cannot abate, we cannot reduce to zero. There will be some unavoidable residual emissions, and we need to offset, we need to compensate these unavoidable emissions with certain forms of carbon removal technology. So what many in the business area know as offsetting, CO2 compensation, that's also something that the policymakers are discussing. If you think about afforestation, other forms of that will play a role in the future. Science tells us that it will not be possible to decarbonize every process, every business area out there. So that also plays a role. But just to kind of highlight this fact to you there in this graph, the significance of this carbon removal technology in terms of the reduction needed is really low. So the focus now, but also in the future, has to be on the reduction of emissions in every sector out there. And only then, if we really achieve a strong, a steep reduction of emissions, then this compensation, this offsetting comes into play, and also then only in a limited significance in relation to the remaining emissions out there. So coming from that, net zero as a new guiding star, the question is, what does it mean in a business context? What does it mean for companies? When we discuss this with company representatives, we try to kind of structure this into different spheres. So there's a political sphere, we talked about this already. It's not only the EU coming forward with net zero targets, it's also many other jurisdictions, many other nations, states wanting to become net zero, having this ambition out there. And there's also, of course, the scientific sphere. So we know from IPCC reports, from scientific kind of groundwork, what net zero means, how we can achieve this, and what role mitigation, compensation, and other forms of strategies should play in this. Then, for me, an important factor there are also the environmental NGOs, Greenpeace, Science Based Targets Initiative, WWF, and others, because they are kind of really, I'd say, helpful in translating scientific evidence into hands-on materials and methodologies. Also, in terms of being critical about these developments, showing the limitations, showing the pitfalls. I want to highlight the net expectations paper by Greenpeace down there. It's really helpful in understanding what companies should be aware of and what the kind of the pitfalls can be, and what you should kind of try to avoid as a company in terms of your net zero ambitions. And in the end, kind of to sum this up, the definition of net zero for business coming from IPCC and being translated into business language by the Science Based Targets Initiative. Net zero for business means achieving climate neutrality for all greenhouse gases. So it's not only about carbon, it's not only about CO2, also in covering all the other relevant greenhouse gases, and that within the company's value chain. So meaning scope 3 emissions also shall be part of this, should also be reduced until not avoidable anymore, and then neutralized by any forms of compensation. But by achieving this state of climate neutrality, not only nation states, not only kind of on a global sphere, but also each individual business, each organization out there shall focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in line with 1.5 degree pathway. So a steep level of reduction. And only once you kind of implemented this long enough, then offsetting of the remaining emissions comes into play. There are a lot of also market developments out there, just highlighting 3 of them. Nestle Net Zero Roadmap, I will also go into a little bit detail in the end of my contribution today, how Nestle is planning to become net zero in the future. Also, big oil companies, interestingly, are claiming or are kind of committing to net zero until a certain deadline. Especially interested, of course, for these big emitters, how they plan to achieve that with or without changing the business models. And then Microsoft is one example. They go further. They claim that they will become carbon negative actually by 2030. And that's not only regarding their current emissions, but also covering all their historic emissions. So Microsoft has the ambition that they will erase any carbon footprint that they had in the history of the company by current reductions and future removals of greenhouse gases. So coming back from the examples a little bit to the theory behind that, if a company plans to kind of engage with that, plans to engage either in science-based targets or net zero, then try to simply explain this to you, how you should kind of proceed with that. You know your status quo emissions, that's the blue bar at the beginning. That's you kind of saying that's your status quo, that's 2020 emissions of greenhouse gases. You know where 1.5 degree aligned mitigation pathway can be for you. You set an interim milestone, which is aligned with this reduction pathway. That can be an interim science-based target. But you have the ambition to go further. You're interested in net zero as well. Then head down the line until you will reach more or less this the zero emissions, but as far as possible, as far as they can be avoided, these emissions. Then set the net zero targets for this deadline. and kind of mitigate and compensate the remaining emissions with carbon removals until the net zero target. Anything more, which is in the compensation area of this, so the gray area, that is seen as kind of voluntary, that's optional. The message here is companies, of course, compensation has a cost. There is a euro, a dollar value behind that. It's not cheap. An average ton of CO2 compensated can be from 5 euros per ton up to 100 euros per ton, depending on the project you want to support. But any euro invested in that at the moment, it's rather invested, or it's better invested in the reduction of emissions and not in the offsetting. So the offsetting really should come into play later on, once you were able to bend your curve in terms of a 1.5 degree reduction pathway. So key elements for climate strategy according to Science Based Targets Initiative are an interim science-based target, which leads the way, which kind of guides you in the reduction of emissions, a net zero target showing the ambition when you want to become net zero, when in the future, and then optional compensation, but also the carbon removals leading to net zero. And one element which is, for example, highlighted in the Greenpeace paper on this net zero development is companies should be transparent about the forms of the carbon removal they tend to support. So if you want to become carbon neutral, that's fine. Be transparent about it. Set this reduction pathway. Tell us how much you want to reduce, how much, and also tell us how you plan to compensate. So in which projects do you intend to invest your money in? Then just a short kind of really introduction about carbon dioxide removal technologies and how they can play a role in corporate offsetting. We know from climate science that we will not be able to reach a state of carbon neutrality or net zero as a global society, so as kind of planet Earth, so to say, as humanity on planet Earth, without any form of carbon dioxide removal. Because as I said, there will be some processes, some technologies which cannot be reduced until zero, and these remaining emissions need to be compensated in any form. This can be technology projects, so carbon capture and utilization, for example, or nature-based solutions, so any forms of natural forms out there which sequester carbon or any other greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere and store them in a natural system. But all these approaches, all these CDR approaches have scale and technology limitations and also might have negative environmental impacts. So the most important thing to look for, again, here the link to the Greenpeace paper, which is really good in highlighting these limitations and impacts to look out for. There are certain limitations of the land we have, of the kind of the arable land we have on our planet. And we will need to use that for food production. There are also other forms of land management we need as a human society. And CDR, nature-based solutions to sequester carbon, of course, they should also have a space in there, but we cannot use all the space we have only for carbon sequestration and nature-based solutions. We need to find other ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere, because we just don't have the space out there to plant forests everywhere, restore wetlands everywhere. It's just not possible. And it also can bring a lot of environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts. So when companies think about their offsetting strategies, think about the role offsetting should play in their comprehensive climate strategies, then again, reiterated, focus on mitigation and try to bring this chunk of emissions which cannot be avoided and need to be offsetted to the smallest number as possible. Be transparent about how much you planned, how much you anticipate to offset by any forms of carbon dioxide removals. And if possible, try to do the offsetting part in your value chain. So for example, if you are a retailer and have a lot of agricultural products in your product portfolio, really try to engage with farmers, try to engage with any forms of agricultural productions out there. There are great forms of carbon dioxide removals in agricultural systems, agroforestry, other forms out there, which can be cost efficient, which can have really positive impacts on the environment and on the climate. So look out for these win-win-win situations and solutions. And of course, also look for any trade-offs, because as Ivan will tell us more than in the end of our webinar, there are certain biodiversity trade-offs between climate solutions and biodiversity targets. And I think that many stakeholders are not really aware of them at the moment, but they are there, and we need to create this awareness and look out for them, because as we mentioned, biodiversity is kind of the next big thing, and we have really to look out for any biodiversity impacts of corporate strategies which are implemented already. Giving you a kind of a generic overview how you can kind of include and integrate the information that we talked about now in the last minutes into any form of your decarbonization strategy. So these are the 6 steps that we kind of recommend to any organization who wants to engage in climate action. You should start kicking off by setting up a clear structure, assign defined responsibilities, who in your organization is responsible for climate action, who should kind of steer this from the top, and who should be driving climate action in your company, in your organization. Then in phase 2, really be clear about the scoping. Set your boundaries, set your objectives, be clear about what is my baseline, where and when, what do I want to achieve, what do I want to be carbon neutral, what types of greenhouse gases are relevant, is it just CO2, is it also CH4 or other forms of greenhouse gases. So be clear about the scope of your climate strategy. Don't lose anything which might be material for you. Then comes the analysis phase. That's typically one of the more work heavy phases out there, because you need to establish your carbon footprint, your baseline, and based on this status quo, you need to find solutions which are cost efficient and have a clear benefit in terms of bringing down your greenhouse gas emissions. So look out for any measures out there, assess their potentials in terms of carbon efficiency, in terms of costs, in terms of barriers which might be there for their implementation, and so on. So be clear about where you're coming from, the baseline, and what's the possibility for you as an organization to reduce emissions, to decarbonize in the future. And based on that analysis, based on this baseline, you can define your strategy. You can define any ambition you have, commitments you want to set internally and externally. So mainly target systems, science-based targets and other forms can guide you through that. But also be clear about any fields of action and reduction pathways. So I think hardly any board, hardly any management will approve climate strategy without knowing exactly where are our pain points, where are our touching points, how much will it cost, and are we able to fulfill our promises, our targets with the technologies, with the investments and so on we have at hand. Once you have kind of cleared that commitment from the top, you can start with implementation. I think it's always good to have some quick wins and be able to implement really on the short term to show a first decline in emissions. But of course, also planning for the long term is important. Look out for any forms of new technologies you can implement, carbon neutral or climate friendly substitutes you might be able to offer to the market. And there also the offsetting of emissions can come into play. But again, focus on the reduction, and offsetting can be one part of the climate strategy, but shouldn't be the main emphasis of your strategy and also of your investments in terms of monetary investments. Then finally, we wanted to bring you 2 examples of companies which we think are really engaged and really kind of front runners in terms of sustainability in a broader sense, but climate action and environmental strategies more particular. Mondi Group is one of the companies we are happy to support in different areas, in different projects. Mondi Group is really engaged, is one of 10 companies on the CDP A list, AAA list 2020. So one of the companies which have a CDP A rating in all the 3 thematic areas, climate, forest, water. So that shows they are one of the front runners when it comes to corporate sustainability out there. And Mondi, for some years now, they have a science-based targets implemented. At the moment, they are thinking about being more ambitious on that, also including scope 3 emissions in their target system. That's one of their action points at the moment. but they are not only concerned about greenhouse gas emissions and climate action. You will also find in their corporate strategies, in their sustainability strategies, areas such as zero deforestation in our value chain, in our supply chain. So deforestation can be a climate issue, but it also, of course, become an environmental issue in more general sense. Can also be, of course, a biodiversity issue. And also biodiversity is an area where Mondi is engaged in. So they do water stewardship assessments. They plan to do biodiversity assessments for all their central operations, so pulp and paper mills, but also in the forest operations. So in the forests and plantations where they are getting their wood from, their timber from. So Mondi, one example with a broader sustainability strategy, but climate and biodiversity play a central part in. Now, as promised, the example of Nestle. And Nestle, one of, I think everybody knows Nestle. It's a big international company. They have a really heavy carbon footprint if you also look at their scope 3 emissions. So all in all three scopes together, their carbon footprint in 2020 was more than 113 million tons of CO2. So that's a lot. The main part of this is in their supply chain. So almost 95% of emissions happen in their supply chain, mainly in their upstream supply chain, of course. And Nestle made the commitment last year they will become net zero by 2050 in all three scopes, so including this big chunk of emissions in their value chain. And what I like about this picture there about the Nestle Net Zero Roadmap is they are quite clear about where they want to achieve which form of carbon reduction, including how they want to engage with their suppliers and how to engage with also with the product portfolios in the end. So really a kind of comprehensive picture of an international leading company, how they plan to implement this idea of net zero in their context. Deforestation again plays a role here, of course, in their supply chains. You will also find certain certifications for the products out there. So, for example, certified sustainable palm oil, certified sustainable ingredients, and also again the offsetting has some role in their carbon strategy. So they plan, for example, just to give you one idea, by 2025 they plan to plant 200 million trees. 2030, sorry, it is 200 million trees by 2030 to be able to offset their unavoidable and remaining emissions and becoming net zero until this milestone of 2050. With that kind of inspiring examples, I would hand over to Ivan to give you another perspective of the next big thing in corporate sustainability.
Thanks, Konstantin. Actually, excellent link there with the biodiversity issues. Obviously, a lot of companies are really thinking about, okay, can we plant some trees? Can we do some regenerative agriculture? Can we really offset those emissions in our supply chain? Because honestly, there's when you're a company and when you have to work in the supply chain in the scope 3, it is very difficult. No, it's very easy actually to get lost. And especially for a lot of these food-based companies, it is so obvious that you want to work on the land sector. There is a very big drive and a very big ambition to do it. But then there's some issues that we should watch out for. And biodiversity is first and foremost one of those issues. Yes, as if we did not have enough things to worry about, we have the global climate crisis. And right now, more and more people are talking about the biodiversity crisis, a decline in biodiversity in different rates, in different continents, but unanimously going down. Some quite staggeringly. I mean, in Latin America, the species ranges have decreased by nearly 100%, which is just staggering. This is all, by the way, based on the WWF's Living Planet Report 2020. And biodiversity, it's not just one thing. There is multiple drivers there. You have land use change, you have overexploitation, hunting, illegal logging, invasive species, but as well pollution and climate change. Climate change is a pressure on biodiversity by changing greenhouse gas concentrations, by shifting species ranges, by causing different ecological changes in the biosphere at large, and as well the way we respond as people to manage climate issues will also have an effect on biodiversity. The land-based sector and what we do there being prime among them. Just to put things into context, climate and biodiversity, I jokingly like to say that sustainability really likes food metaphors. We have these two very high-profile things. Donut economics is basically, you've probably heard of planetary boundaries. That's it. We have this ecological ceiling, the safe space where we can operate in order to meet our societal needs. So there are societal needs to meet. That we need to lift people out of poverty. We need to expand the middle class. All these sorts of things. But then we are not really using our natural capital, our biodiversity, sustainably. So biodiversity is being lost. We have climate change in unsustainable levels. We have nitrogen and phosphorus, so from fertilizers, from waste. This all puts us in a situation where we may not, or we probably will not be able to meet our needs in the future sustainably. And just to emphasize that, if we go back to Sustainable Development Goals, the biosphere on this wedding cake sort of graphic is at the bottom. It is at the basis of everything, and actually climate in a very small part here you will see. So everything we do on climate and biodiversity will permeate and will actually allow us to do things for society and the economy. If we don't have the stable natural environment, then we will have some problems then meeting our basic needs as a society and as an economy. Why should you care though? Well, biodiversity basically underpins the economy. This is a graph from something called the Dasgupta Review. It was commissioned by the ancient treasury of the United Kingdom. And basically, that's, for you, those of you who don't know, the UK Economics Ministry. Fun fact for you, the head of the UK Economics Ministry is not the Minister of the Economy. It is actually the Prime Minister of the country. This is a bit different than all the other countries. But basically, Boris Johnson signed this report. So it comes from the very top level of the UK government and shows a sort of political intent in thinking about the importance of biodiversity for the economy. Obviously, no, a government would not commission this if they weren't serious about it, basically. And actually, the links between the economy and biodiversity are complex and they have been shown before. Even one small change, habitat modification, can have all sorts of permeating non-linear effects throughout the economy and reach many different sectors. And look no further than COVID-19. I mean, it's what got us into this place, is why we are talking to you on GoToWebinar right now. One of the key drivers of the COVID-19 pandemic and its emergence is thought to be actually climate change and deforestation. So going into environments where zoonotic diseases emerge and thrive, and usually pristine natural environments, basically when people go in there for whatever reason, for poaching, for hunting, for logging, that gives viruses a nice chance to jump over. And now we have COVID on our hands. So yes, congratulations. It's not to say that it is the only issue that is a driver, but it's definitely one of the drivers that makes us more exposed to such as zoonotic diseases and shows the sort of the fragility of the economy when it actually is linked to the natural environment. But you don't need to read big reports in order to care, because our message is really policymakers will probably make us care. The EU Green Deal already has in its underpinnings a biodiversity strategy that came out early this year. Sustainable finance, we are expecting as part of the biodiversity strategy delegated act. So in the same way as we now have criteria for climate positive measures, we are expecting the same criteria to happen for measures that support ecosystems and biodiversity by business. So there is a huge shift in the financial sector upcoming that then will permeate into the non-financial sector and the requirements from rating agencies and the requirements that will actually allow us to access finance. Going down, farm to fork strategy is all about the agricultural sector, but obviously impacts everything upstream and everything downstream, food companies, etc. Forest strategy, including decarbonization, including afforestation, land-based carbon removal measures. Zero pollution, blue economy, you name it. European Green Deal is all over biodiversity. Linking very much to climate and really understanding the links that actually you can't just have climate measures without actually protecting the biosphere, because these are linked. And actually, the EU Green Deal already set something that is going to be happening in the global sphere, in the same way as we have a Paris Agreement for climate, we are expecting this year that we will have a Paris-like agreement for biodiversity. This was due 2020, postponed due to the COVID pandemic, but basically global governments will meet in the end of May 2021, and they have the ambition, the vision to adopt a 2020 biodiversity pathway. So 2050 biodiversity goals for limiting biodiversity loss, and then milestones and actions toward 2030. So once something like this becomes international law under the United Nations framework, then this permeates into the, in our case, into the European Union policy, and then this will ultimately permeate at the country level, and we'll have country targets for biodiversity, or at least this is what is expected. So this is why really we think you should care about biodiversity, and we want to tell you about two things that are coming that will help us as business to be able to report on this. And one is science-based targets, but this time for nature. So you already have your greenhouse gas targets, but once companies adopt these global goals, you also want some targets in order to help business meet those biodiversity goals. How is that going to work is the key question here. So far, science-based targets for nature is an initiative by the same network that develops science-based targets for climate, which includes the Global Commons Alliance, includes WWF, includes some other big NGOs, CDP, World Resources Institute. They have an interim guidance out last year, which tells us all about the concepts, the definitions, and basically the path they want to take. And by the end of 2022, we will have the full guidance in order to actually report on this. Here are the key takeaways we feel you should have here. Firstly, so far, greenhouse gases, that's one impact. So if even conceptually it's difficult, but it's still easy enough to grasp our minds around. But then when it comes to biodiversity, this has multiple drivers. There's land use, there's water, there's pollution. All of these issues demand separate thinking. And what's more, 1 kilo of CO2 doesn't really matter where you emit that. It's still the same impact all over the world. But for biodiversity, everything depends on the local context. Local species, local diversity, local ecosystem resilience. I mean, think of water stress, for example. That's a driver that is so different all over the world. So location is going to be important. And right now, as Konstantin said, the land sector isn't really properly accounted in the science-based targets. And even though all the governments around the world are preparing to report on this, but in targets for nature, the land sector is included by definition. So for us, what we need to take away as a business is, firstly, okay, there's so many issues, but materiality is going to be a guiding principle. And the SBTs for nature are really clear on this. You don't need to do everything, you actually can't do everything. So you have to have a very good understanding of what's actually material for you. You would definitely need to understand the local context. So really what's happening in your supply chain, in your value chain, and in your operations in order to properly manage biodiversity issues. And something to be aware of, right now the greenhouse gas protocol and the science-based targets for climate are being updated in parallel in order to be able to support this accounting of carbon emissions from the land sector and these removals and the benefits of afforestation and all these sorts of things. And that's expected at the end of 2021. And this will support the science-based targets for nature, and then we can actually set some targets to sequester carbon and suck it out of the air once we've actually mitigated all the rest of our emissions. Not to scare you, because actually you can actually do a lot of things already. Our point here is, okay, this is coming, this is new, but there's already plenty that companies are doing and that you can do that can prepare you going forward. For the different issues, for example, companies are already setting targets to reduce deforestation. We saw Nestle 100%, Mondi 100%, zero deforestation in the supply chain. You already have initiatives that you can report against. You know, there's CDP forests, there's global accountability framework for deforestation. All these things exist, and companies can already make use of them. Water, or again, CO water mandates, CDP water. Companies have water reduction targets, Coca-Cola, Mondi, Nestle, you name it. Fish, oceanic resources. There's already standards for sustainable sourcing. Companies already have goals on this for sourcing certain species according to internationally recognized standards, in order to limit sourcing from areas that have high biodiversity loss, unsustainable fish stocks, etc. Land sector, as I said, here companies will probably be able to have targets for, okay, I will suck up this much carbon from the air, but from the emissions that are left over, my residual emissions, the emissions constantly set, after we mitigate everything, whatever is left. And finally, biodiversity. Biodiversity is an ecosystem integrity is such a complex issue, but there's already guidances there. The international performance standards of the International Finance Corporation, the Natural Capital Protocols, biodiversity supplement. There's guidance already on how to do nature-based solutions in our value chains so that we can actually leverage nature to work for us. And targets that are expected, regenerative agriculture, we saw this in the Nestle example, avoid sourcing from areas with high risk for species, and maybe even regeneration of nature through ecological focus areas in the agricultural supply chain. This is actually already European policy. Every European agricultural producer needs to have 10% of their land set for this. That's a target. And companies can already use that as a framework in order to structure their targets and their requirements to suppliers. So yeah, really our takeaway is, all right, it seems scary, it seems new, it seems, oh my God, I already have climate to worry about, and now I have 5 different things to also put on my table. But actually, companies that are ahead on sustainability are already doing some of these, or even most of these. And you can already start preparing for the science-based targets for nature, and they make it very clear that they will support existing initiatives. They won't reinvent the wheel. The only thing that will be important for us to learn is the level of ambition. How do we set the target and how big it needs to be going forward? Okay, science-based targets for nature. And then on the other end, we had task force for nature-related climate disclosures. Task force for nature-related finance disclosures, sorry, as opposed to task force for climate. TCFD, task force for climate, is all about the financial risks for our company to do with climate. And that's grown really massively in the past years. Companies are more and more required. They're pushed by investors. They're pushed by rating agencies. They're pushed by even by the stock market. I mean, we have clients coming and saying, do a TCFD report for me, because otherwise they list me from the stock market. And now nature is coming. The case has already been made. There is some guidance on how this will look. What's important for you to know is, again, risks and opportunities for nature are a multiple issue thing. So we have to think a bit broadly. We need to be thinking about our dependencies on nature, and I'll tell you more about this in a second. And something that you need to know is, the tools are currently mostly in development, especially for setting targets in the future and for scenario analysis in the future. But what we'll show you now is that, well, basically what we need to do is we need to broaden the way we think. We need to adopt this natural capital thinking in order to understand our dependencies on nature, in order to actually start preparing already. Because to understand risks for nature, we need to understand 2 things. And this comes from the Natural Capital Protocol. First, our impacts. Our business does something in our supply chain, in our value chain, or maybe somebody else does it. Somebody else does this, it's not us. There's some change in the environment, and this leads to something. In this case, our impact that we have as an example is droughts. Either our activities or somebody else's activities, or actually all of our activities together cause drought. This limits groundwater availability. Then, an agricultural producer can't grow their crops, and potentially that has an impact on us. So it's this thinking of impacts and dependencies. Impacts and dependencies on nature are a key component of the Natural Capital Protocol, and this is really how the thinking of the nature-related disclosures is structured. This leads us into the same thinking as we have for climate, with the same sort of types of risks, only now broadening the horizon and thinking about nature issues. For policy, as I said, new policies are coming. There will be biodiversity targets. And then what permeates there, things like sustainable sourcing. You may end up with some stranded assets. Think about palm oil, already a big biodiversity issue. If that becomes even bigger in the future, well, that's it. Markets, sustainable products, you saw what happened to plastics, reputation, legal, and as well dependencies. We need nature for direct needs, for example, for water. There's issues in the supply chain, decreasing yields from droughts, from floods, whatever. And actually the disaster resilience, climate change, biodiversity loss causing pest outbreaks, droughts, flooding, etc. Where to start? Just to give you an idea, you can use the same thinking as you do for your climate strategy. You just need to scope out, figure out your materiality, figure out on the ground actually what this means in my local context, deal with all these different issues of biodiversity. And then you can actually think about, okay, do I have my climate strategy or my sustainability strategy ready to, in certain places, just adapt certain things and integrate biodiversity, or do I need to do something from scratch? Am I ambitious enough? Can I do more? This is the sort of thinking that we need to have now. And then we can go into implementing and changing things and actually integrating biodiversity issues in our everyday management. All right, just some brief examples. This is one about natural capital thinking in the value chain. There's already tools out there, life cycle assessment tools that allow you to screen even for a big portfolio, in this case, sourcing very many types of fruits and vegetables from all over the world for Metro. What we've done here is we developed this big picture view for them about their impacts on nature in the supply chain. So looking at things for different countries, different drivers, not surprisingly, land use and water use are so important in the supply chain for our Metro. And most of the impacts actually happen at the farm level. And these sorts of tools allow you to see which types of issues, and in what part of the supply chain do you actually then need to focus your thinking, so that you can go in and then you can start really thinking about biodiversity, where it matters the most and where it's actually most beneficial and most impactful for your business. Going in from scoping into analysis, then at the site level, you need to think about, okay, where is the biodiversity around me? Here we have this sort of mapping of biodiversity sensitive areas around a factory, and then thinking about what happens in that factory, different drivers of change, different things like the pipes, fuel use, etc. Setting some measures in order to handle that. And as well downstream for our products in many cases, for example, here for plastics pollution, figuring out once customers use that, where does it happen? In this case, this is an analysis of plastics littering for a client who are really interested in what happens with plastics around the Mekong River, which is where a lot of the plastic pollution in the world happens. This sort of thinking in the local level then allows us to really prioritize our real actions on the ground, understanding our real context in our factories, our suppliers, our products. All right, I won't tell you too much about this because I invite you to join us on the 23rd of March, but you can think about nature-based solutions, and Coca-Cola is already doing this. They had a water replenishment program all over the world, replenishing water for 300 projects in order to manage water risks. And now they're really thinking about how can we link that to other things, especially to climate and to other ecosystem services. We developed a methodology for them that is free to use. It's launched last week. You can learn all about it on the 23rd of March on Tuesday. This is just an example of what it allows you to do. Example for Ionia, the 5th largest bog in Europe. Basically what Coca-Cola did is they turned it from this muddy, drained mess that was releasing all the carbon in the atmosphere, and all the water was gone, into a bog that is very close to its natural state, with the carbon safely locked up in the ground. And actually, when we try to measure that and we value the ecosystem service benefits, carbon is huge, and it's right there with the primary benefit that why this is actually done, the water risk management. So the carbon wasn't even the goal, but it is so obvious as a benefit that it makes sense for us to think about these nature projects as complex projects that will help us for many different issues in our value chain. And also this sort of methodology allows us to prioritize and to see, okay, in this case, if I invest more, I get bigger benefits, but actually in cases like this Ionia, there's very big wins I can have with very little investment. You have investment here, you have value here. Most of these projects pay back for themselves and actually quite well, and actually some of them are really, really successful. So if you'd like to learn more, 23rd of March is where we'll be with a representative of the Coca-Cola company to tell you all about this and how you can use it in practice. And finally, supply chain. This one was about water pricing. Basically, water prices don't have anything to do with biodiversity in the environment. They only care about putting the water from the ground into your tap. So it's electricity costs, pumping, but there's no other cost to do with nature there. What we did is, for this company that really wanted to measure water risks in the supply chain and control them and be able to account for them in financial decision making, we put together this shadow price of water. So this is valuing the natural benefits of water for other users and including that benefit in financial decision making, because this is the value of the water if somebody else were to use it. So if we're using it, that means somebody else won't be able to. And that's a risk for us. And we put this into our financial calculation based on understanding water stress on the ground with a tool that already exists. A lot of companies are using a free tool, the WRI Aqueduct. And this sort of thinking then allows us to say, okay, but actually if I'm in Italy, on top of my €1 water price, let's say there's a €6 risk that I need to take into account. And then when I need to invest in water measures, and then I want to think about cost-benefit analysis, this changes the picture entirely and drives us toward really integrating water risks into our decision-making, into our investment making, in the same way as a carbon price that a lot of companies already have allow you to do that for carbon. So this potential exists already, and a lot of companies are already doing these things. So we don't need to wait is our message. No, you can already start preparing for these new things about managing biodiversity going forward. Okay, so about bending the curve. This will be the new talk. People want, well, governments want, society wants to have a biodiversity positive future, reduce biodiversity loss, actually go into biodiversity gain. It's not just about carbon neutral, now it's going to be also about biodiversity positive. And this is where businesses will be expected to be. And this is where we need to really start thinking about, okay, what can we actually do to move forward this and to support the global goals? Because as I said, it's coming, and policymakers and the market will move in the same way as it has moved for carbon, it will move for biodiversity. All right, that's what I have. Just to sum up, Konstantin, would you like to tell us about what we already expect, what we must have?
So yeah, to sum it up shortly before we leave some time for questions and discussion. So what we see, climate action is kind of established. The tools are out there for years or even decades already. So what companies are asked for by the stakeholders is commitment and real action on climate based on existing standards, because as mentioned, they are out there, they are rather established more or less. And to become a front runner regarding climate action is becoming harder and harder, because if everybody's doing it, of course, if you want to be a front runner ahead of the markets, then that becomes really more challenging for you. Leading to biodiversity, we know from even what Ivan told us, scientific policy insights, market developments, biodiversity is an emerging topic. It can be an emerging risk if you don't prepare for it, and if you don't engage for it proactively. And at the moment, in terms of materiality, in terms of sustainability topics, it is seen as a material topic for certain sectors, but hard to grasp for many others. And that will change in the future in our taking.
Yeah, indeed. The future must-haves is really what we were talking about now. Biodiversity commitment and action is coming, and it will be a must-have. Government policies are emerging, the standards are emerging. A lot of businesses actually are preemptively taking action in order to be prepared. As you've seen already, you will have to set the targets, and you will need to explore the risks for new issues. So it makes sense to start thinking now, and in fact, you can already start to think now. The awareness is building, Actually, the awareness is already there in some sectors, and the various stakeholders are pushing for it more. But actually, if you think about where the NGO space has been, and even the science in the past couple of years, they have never stopped, and it's just going to become bigger and bigger. So that's really our takeaway message here. Final thing we want to actually do is hear from you. We do realize we are running close on time, but really we went through a lot of material. So let's do a question and answer session. You can post on Menti and you can vote on the different sort of questions. Let me just open that. And then we can decide on the best ones or not the best ones, the ones that most people want to actually learn about. And we can tell you all about those. Let me just turn that on. All right, technology, please don't fail me now. Cool, it's happening. I'll just give you the code in the chat as well. All right, we just sent you the code in the chat. Just give you a bit of time to formulate those questions. As I said, a lot of content, but definitely a lot of interesting things to talk about. And hopefully, at least I hope, some of the concepts became a bit more clear in your minds. And actually, I have here some questions from the audience from before that I can start on now before this fills up. Actually, if you can't, for whatever reason, use this, please do let us know in the chat and we'll figure out what to do. All right, here I have some questions already about sourcing from areas of high extinction risks, what the recommendation is. And actually, this commenter actually noting that no, they have understood that it can already lead to lower revenues because of the impacts of indigenous communities in the local supply chain. Actually, there's a lot of pushback there already. So it makes sense for us to be thinking about these biodiversity issues even now when we are thinking about this. Oh, can you share the slides? Of course I can. We will actually email you with the slides and with some links after this session, probably tomorrow, and then we will be able to take it from there. And we will be happy for you to contact us. What do you think are the biggest challenges for companies in setting science-based targets for nature? I would say it's figuring out where to start the materiality, figuring out, okay, where am I in my supply chain? Is it the water that's important? Is it the land? Which countries? For which products? For which ingredients? You need to do a lot of thinking before you start in order to actually then focus on where it really matters, because it's so big. You need to prioritize. You can't do everything. So for me, that's the biggest challenge for companies right now. And after you figure that out, then it's really the in-depth sector thinking for every single issue separately. Okay. How do pure service providers approach climate strategies and biodiversities? And this is IT, SSCs. If we mean here the service sector, as you already saw from one of Konstantin's examples, Microsoft, for example, is really on the ball with carbon. Actually, all the big service providers, the IT companies, they really understand that it's one of their big issues, because well, most of what they do is consume electricity in order to give us all the services we need. So it's already there. And actually, if you're a big company, I don't think you will have the luxury of missing any of these topics. Both Microsoft and other IT companies, Siemens, etc., are already thinking about water in the supply chain, are already thinking about biodiversity issues and deforestation, even if it's not that huge for them, as opposed to some other sectors like the food sector. So it's very unlikely that anybody will be left behind, I think, even if they are a pure service provider, because the consumer awareness is there, the NGO awareness is there, and actually the big service providers are so prominent in our thinking and in our minds. Everybody knows about Microsoft, for example. Everybody knows about Siemens. I think this is just going to be something that will be inevitable. What kind of businesses have to work on science-based target in nature? Is there an EU regulation? Right now, there is no regulation that requires this now, but once this comes in 2022, well, actually, no, there's no regulation on science-based targets for carbon either. It's something that is purely demanded by the market. So it's not really the EU that will make you do it. It's more, it will become by itself big, that everybody will have to jump on board. What kind of companies? Definitely the food companies, the ingredient companies, the agriculture companies will be most exposed, I think. But then think about mining, heavy industry, and even think about IT, etc. In the supply chain, there is something to do for everybody for different issues. And as well here, the links to climate are also very important. If you want to be thinking about deforestation, about locking up that carbon and sucking it up from the atmosphere, you also need to be thinking about nature. The EU regulations here will really set the scene. For example, sustainable finance, once that tells you, okay, there are certain businesses that can support biodiversity, that will build the market, and that will tell us, you know, where we need to go. And then finance institutions will be on this. They'll be able to structure projects. They'll be able to demand certain things from from the companies they invest in, and this will permeate in the non-financial sector. Okay. And always such a big topic, but hopefully, you know, hopefully clearer now. Is insetting of carbon considered a carbon offset? Constantine, could you help me out on this one?
Yeah, insetting, offsetting. I mean, the definition kind of insetting is it's offsetting in your value chain. So that's why you kind of include this in your value chain. That's why the difference of off and insetting comes into play. In the end, yes, insetting is considered as type of carbon offsetting, closely to your business context, closely to your corporate boundaries and your suppliers. That's why it's kind of considered more valuable because you really engage in your supply chain, in your value chain, thus making it more meaningful rather in investing in any project around the world which has nothing to do with your company context.
And indeed, as far as I understand, for the science-based targets, both for climate and then for nature, if the carbon offsets are going to count, they need to happen in your value chain. So it actually needs to be insetting rather than offsetting. And the basic logic here, I think, is clear. It is far more valuable and important as a company to invest where we actually do business in the supply chain rather than buy an offsetting certificate in the other side of the world, which has nothing to do with our business. I think that's a clear logic, and it's a logic that is very much in the SBT development right now. So I think definitely this will come. The land-based sector is there. All the policymakers are thinking about it. So we as business will also be able to work on this. It's just we need to figure out how to properly be able to claim it. And the easiest way is do it where your business actually is, pay for it. Then it's easy enough to convince somebody that you should count the benefits and not somebody else. Because for carbon in the land sector, the big question is who gets to count. And as well, when you plant a tree, it doesn't just happen immediately. It takes 10, 20 years to suck up all the carbon. So you need to really be able to show that what you've done is persistent. It is there and it will stay there in order for you to be able to count it. All right. How do we integrate biodiversity and green building certificates in real estate developments? I'm no expert on this, but we'd be happy to, if you drop us a question in the chat as well, we'll be happy to get back to you on this, because we do have some colleagues that work on this very extensively. I do think there are already some biodiversity topics in some of the green building standards, LEED, the green, etc. But I don't really know off the top of my head, to be fair. It'd be interesting here to see, but it's definitely what I'm thinking about right now is this whole angle about nature-based solutions and urban biodiversity. There's a lot of movement. I know Constantine has some of this sort of in the next neighborhood in Austria. New neighborhoods, new residential developments where biodiversity is really integrated in the planning phase in order to be able to deal with certain types of issues, whether it's water pollution, whether it's water retention, urban heat island, all these sorts of things. So this I think is an opportunity. And as well, there's already some guidances out there, for example, by IUCN for nature-based solutions that I think will be hugely valuable in order for us to properly structure these projects and think about them. But definitely, I encourage you leave us a question in the chat as well, because here in the Mentee we don't know who you are. But if you put it in the chat, we'll be able to get back to you and we can discuss more if it's valuable for you. Do you think an initiative for biodiversity supporting aware companies, front runners, would be necessary to build the momentum, like an innovate for nature for startups? Actually, what I think is, well, what I know is that the initiative is already there. It's called Business for Nature. There's a global movement in the same way as there was the We Mean Business coalition that started the science-based targets or supported the science-based targets for climate. We Mean Business supports the science-based targets for nature, the task force for nature. So the movement is already there. It's just topic is gaining momentum right now. I think as soon as we have those global goals being discussed come May, this will start to pick up, and then the discussion will really move forward. You mentioned startups. Yeah, Konstantin, yes, please.
I just wanted to add, I think one of the main drivers in the whole sustainability market and developments is rating agencies and investors, financial players. And I think once biodiversity plays a bigger role in ESG ratings, that will act as a catalyzer for developments there, because frontrunners will be supported, will reap the benefits, and all the others will need to follow if they will maintain or improve their ratings. I think that's a big driver for any initiative out there.
All right, everyone, we are out of time. So in order to be respectful of your other commitments, we suggest we close, though there are some cool questions here that I will be happy to send over in writing to you after this webinar is over. And if you have a question that is really burning on your mind, as I said, please put it in the chat. Then we can follow up with you personally, because then we know who you are. And we'll be happy to answer this, and we can take it from there. We do apologize for running slightly late. A lot of ground to cover, but yes, hopefully interesting for you, and hopefully really helping you figure out where you need to go next for your sustainability initiatives. All right. Thank you dearly, and please do get in touch. We'll be happy to talk further, and actually we will be in touch. Please do join us on Tuesday for our session on nature-based solutions. And also, we will also send you a feedback form for We Value Nature in order for us for you to provide feedback on the event and on the challenge in itself. And also, we will very much like to invite you to join the Capitals Coalition community that is all about these sort of biodiversity issues. And we'll send you this information after so that you can look at it in your own time. Okay. Thanks very much. Sorry again for being slightly late, but hopefully this was all very interesting for you and very important and relevant. Do drop us those questions. Do get in touch. Our emails are here. We'll be happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.